It was all because of a single mistake during the tattoo process. The Yakuza boss exploded in a volcanic rage. "I'll tattoo a massive hole into your thick skull. You think I won't?" The tattoo artist pleaded, "I didn't mean any offense." At that moment, one of his subordinates abruptly presented a letter. The Yakuza boss, not bothering to read the contents, casually tore it open. Immediately, a stream of bizarre black sand spilled out. The tattoo artist, witnessing this, was struck with unspeakable terror. It turned out that years ago, this old man had also received a similar letter, sealed with red wax. Nobody who had ever received that letter had survived more than 2.5 seconds. The only reason the old man had escaped this fate was that his heart was unusually located on the right side of his chest. That saved his life that day. As the Yakuza boss continued to mock the old man, one of his henchmen suddenly had half his head sliced clean off. Fresh blood and brain matter splattered across the floor. The young women were petrified, their faces turning white as ghosts, and they screamed incessantly. Before the Yakuza boss could even react, the lights went out completely. The headquarters was plunged into total darkness. Panic erupted instantly. Everyone frantically grabbed their weapons, nervously pointing them into the black void around them. Suddenly, one of the henchmen was yanked away by an iron chain that seemed to appear from nowhere. In a blink, his body was shredded like confetti. The bloodbath left everyone horrified, their hearts pounding in their chests. The thugs went berserk, firing wildly in every direction, bullets flying like hail in a storm. The bullets tore through everything, shattering objects and sending fragments flying. The sheer firepower was impressive, but it was utterly useless. The enemy seemed to be symbiotic with the darkness, hidden like demons in every corner. They used the darkness as their shield and silence as their blade. Their ghostly figures appeared and disappeared, moving like soundless phantoms. Each attack was marked only by a fleeting flash of cold light. They left no trace, impossible to grasp, impossible to defend against. The gang's thugs fell one by one like flies. In that fleeting moment, the once loud and chaotic scene had become deathly still and silent. Only the Yakuza boss remained, standing alone in a pool of blood. So terrified he lost control of his bladder. With their target completely eliminated, the dark figures, always elusive and hidden in the shadows, slowly began to reveal themselves. 57 years ago, the old man had cheated death, but this time, his luck had run out. You've probably wondered about the world's most notorious assassin organizations. Most people think the CIA and KGB are the epitome of danger. However, they don't realize that hidden in the shadows of history lies an even more mysterious force. It is an assassination group of ninja assassins stretching back thousands of years, known as Ozunu. Their members undergo hellish training from childhood. Their body fat is kept below 3%, and their muscle fiber density is 3 times that of normal humans. Taking a head in the darkness is effortless for them. The organization's history dates back to the turbulent Sengoku period of Japan. At that time, ninjas intervened in the balance of power through secret assassinations and intelligence gathering. From the open conflicts between daimyo to the results of critical battles, their shadows were always present. However, centuries have passed. This organization has not disappeared with time, but instead expanded its criminal influence globally, infiltrating everywhere. To this day, they have quietly built a vast network beneath the surface of modern society. The so-called Shadow Empire is a complex web of 9 subordinate ninja branches, like a giant matrix covering every corner of the globe, to effectively carry out transnational assassination missions and countless other illegal activities. In short, the influence and scope of their power extend far beyond the imagination of ordinary people. And all these dark activities are under the direct control of the current Ozunu Grandmaster, as the supreme leader of the entire organization. The members absolutely obey his orders, regarding his will as the sole guide for all their actions. Behind this obedience lies a series of horrifying practices. Every year, the Ozunu Grandmaster dispatches his subordinates all over the world to seek out orphans with extraordinary talent but with no place to call home. He tells them, "You were born to serve me, and you will die for me." When these children are brought to the organization's secret base, they face extremely cruel and inhuman training. From testing the limits of their physical endurance to learning assassination techniques, from weapon mastery to infiltration and escape skills, each training session is filled with danger and pain. Even a small mistake can result in severe punishment. Therefore, these children endure tremendous physical and mental torment. But they cannot escape. Because they have no family, they can only rely on the organization that gave them this chance to live, making them completely subservient. The organization continually brainwashes them every day, causing them to gradually lose themselves in fear and reverence. In this way, these once innocent and pure children eventually become the Ozunu Grandmaster's most loyal and obedient pawns, willingly throwing themselves into danger for him in the world of darkness. Among these newly joined orphans, the Ozunu Grandmaster takes a particular liking to a young man with a keen, observant gaze honed over many years. He immediately recognizes the boy's potential. If nurtured, one day he will surely become the organization's sharpest blade. Thus, the Grandmaster personally bestows upon him the name Raizo, a name symbolizing the inheritance of power. Before officially starting his training, the Ozunu Grandmaster imparted all of the unique skills he had spent a lifetime researching and mastering to these children. Holding nothing back, he told them that to become an absolutely perfect assassin, they must overcome the control of their bodies and pain. This is the inevitable path to becoming a ninja. With that, he drew out a sharp blade and emotionlessly slashed his palm. However, a strange scene unfolded. The wound, which should have been gushing with blood, didn't shed a single drop. The Grandmaster closed his eyes, began to mutter mysterious ninja incantations, and waved his hand to create a symbol in the air above his fist. When he opened his palm again, the wound had completely healed. This is the way of the ninja. The path of a ninja's training is extremely arduous. The daily diet is as simple as it can be. On the table, there is only a bowl of rice noodles mixed with bland, clear water, leaving the children in a constant state of near starvation. High-intensity training in this state is undoubtedly an extreme challenge to the body's endurance. But it is in this difficult environment that their bodies are constantly transformed and gradually adapted, becoming more resilient and developing a body as strong as steel. In addition, the Grandmaster arranges one-on-one matches for them. Through this survival of the fittest competition mechanism, he selects the children with exceptional qualities, physique, mentality, and combat skills. The winner will have the right to climb the ladder to the top, receiving more brutal training. But once they fail, the fate that awaits them is often extremely tragic, either being slaughtered by the victor or being expelled and eliminated. Losing the opportunity to train is still a lighter punishment. The most horrific is for children who are abandoned to fend for themselves. During this process, every method to eradicate emotion was thoroughly employed. The children were taught to discard all weakness and compassion, retaining only coldness and decisiveness. Emotions were considered a burden, and kindness was seen as a weakness. Day after day, year after year, their inner selves gradually became as hard as steel, as cold as ice. Having no regard for the life and death of others, one can imagine how cold and ruthless the individuals who ultimately emerged from this bloody training system would be. How difficult it was to become a top ninja. Take this boy, for example. From a young age, he tirelessly practiced stealth. If he made even the slightest sound, the master would whip the soles of his feet. Even when his flesh was torn and blood flowed freely, the boy had to grit his teeth, endure the bone-chilling pain, and complete the training without missing a single step. But late at night, the wound began to throb with excruciating pain, as if countless sharp blades were frantically churning under the soles of his feet, tormenting Raizo. The only thing he could do was grind his teeth and endure it. Witnessing this, his senior sister secretly took ointment and quietly bandaged his wound. Although the organization's rules were extremely strict, absolutely forbidding members from showing emotion, this hidden moment of warmth made Reizo realize that he wasn't just a killing tool, he was a human being with flesh and blood. As time passed, Reizo gradually matured through constant hardship, and the difficulty of his training also steadily increased. The master began arranging for him and his senior brother to hone their environmental adaptation skills in a training hall suspended with countless fireballs. However, Reizo, lacking ruthlessness, had an opportunity to severely injure his opponent during a confrontation, but his compassion prevented him from striking a fatal blow. As a result, he failed when his senior brother unexpectedly attacked him with a fireball. Reizo suffered a severe head injury and didn't immediately get up to continue fighting. He lay prone on the floor, unmoving. This was undoubtedly a second serious mistake, because the master had taught them from a young age that a person's weakness lies in their physical body. Only by conquering pain can they overcome the limitations of the body. To become a qualified ninja, they must first have an iron will and extraordinary endurance. They must be able to quickly adjust their state and continue fighting in any injury or difficult circumstance. Reizo's previous attitude greatly disappointed the master. He immediately intervened personally, inflicting punishment that allowed him to truly feel the extreme pain. A feeling of torment was etched into his memory. All the senior brothers, senior sisters, and junior brothers thought he would have difficulty surviving this long night, but they didn't know that he was transforming both soul and body. He constantly meditated and comprehended in pain, continuously recalling the master's teachings in his mind, trying to find an opportunity to break through this hellish torment. Until the next morning, when the master opened the door, he saw Reizo sitting steadily in front of the door like a meditating Zen master. Clearly, he had grasped the secret of the method of controlling pain. From then on, the master devised a unique training challenge for him. Each subsequent year, Reizo would have to give up one sense to further enhance his body's potential and train the sharpness of his mind. The first year began with sight, the sense he relied on the most. This meant that he would lose his reliance on light and shadow and could only use his other senses to perceive the outside world. He then had to fight the great master while blindfolded. With the removal of vision, Reizo's reaction obviously slowed down a lot. He could only rely on memory and instinct to barely evade. In constant failures, Reizo gradually adapted to a world covered in darkness. In this process, Every method to suppress emotion was ruthlessly employed. The children were taught to discard all weakness and compassion, retaining only coldness and decisiveness. Emotions were considered a burden, and kindness was seen as a weakness. Day after day, year after year, their inner selves gradually became as hard as steel, as cold as ice. Having no regard for the life and death of others, one can imagine how cold and ruthless the individuals who ultimately emerged from this bloody training system would be. How difficult it was to become a top ninja. Let's not talk about what they went through. Let's talk about how they have to maintain being like a ninja. Watch Raizo. One day, Raizo accidentally saw his youngest sister secretly cutting off the iron wire that restrained the growth of the tree. This action certainly violated the regulations set by the master. If discovered, she would surely be locked in the dungeon. However, the youngest senior sister didn't care. It seemed like the iron wire she cut wasn't binding the trees, but rather the shackles of freedom in her heart. The next day, the match took place as scheduled. The youngest senior sister excellently surpassed and defeated the senior brother and fellow disciples. According to the regulations, the loser had to endure physical pain. This was the organization's iron rule from the past, aimed at making each ninja grow in pain and draw strength from failure. After that, the master held out a sharp blade, signaling the youngest senior sister to stab the loser. She hesitated, took the blade, looked at the senior brother and fellow disciples lying on the ground, their faces covered in blood, and finally couldn't bring herself to do it and dropped the blade. The master's expression immediately darkened. The master picked up the blade and slashed the youngest senior sister's face, immediately creating a horrifying bleeding wound. However, the punishment didn't stop there. Afterward, she was forced to be locked in an extremely narrow cage, exposed to the scorching sun. Inside, her limbs couldn't be straightened at all. Not only was there no food, but not even a drop of water to drink. Until night fell, Raizo had the opportunity to sneak to the cage in the darkness, like in his childhood, bringing water to the youngest senior sister's mouth. He advised her to give up resisting the master. However, a few days later, on a rainy night, a violent noise woke Raizo from his sleep. He habitually looked at the youngest senior sister's bed, but only saw an empty bed. Without thinking much, he rushed out and found the youngest senior sister trying to escape. The youngest senior sister didn't want to return to that life without light anymore. She earnestly invited Raizo to escape the sea of suffering with her and find a world that belonged to the two of them. However, Raizo chose to stay because the Ozunu organization had long become everything in his life. Hearing Raizo's answer, a hint of disappointment flashed in the youngest senior sister's eyes. She didn't say anything more, but gently approached and left a meaningful kiss on Raizo's cheek. After parting, she climbed over the wall and fled madly into the mountains and forests. However, succeeding in escaping was not easy. The Ozunu organization's patrols were like a net present everywhere. In a short while, her tracks were discovered. Almost immediately, countless ninjas from all directions rushed to surround her. The next day, the youngest senior sister was tied to a torture pillar, symbolizing humiliation. On the master's order, the senior brother immediately raised the ninja blade without hesitation, stabbing each knife directly into the youngest senior sister's heart. After a tragic scream, the youngest senior sister was no more. Raizo witnessed this scene with his own eyes, and a deep hatred grew in his heart. The vow of revenge took root in his mind from that moment. Many years later, the teenage Raizo, powerless when witnessing the youngest senior sister's murder, has now completely transformed into a qualified ninja. To test his academic achievements over the years, the master decided to give him a challenging task. The target of the task is to bring a gold watch back to me. The scene shifts to a thug wearing a vest, a gold watch, and a cigar who is urinating. Without a word more, Raizo disguised himself as a sanitation worker and quietly approached. In this action, he abandoned his usual weapons, only hiding a thin blade in his sleeve. Then, taking advantage of the moment the opponent was off guard, he suddenly stabbed the thug in the neck, but the opponent countered with a spinning back fist, directly knocking him away. That's acupuncture treatment, right? This thug's strength could rival a gorilla's. Not only did he have endless power, but even when he was stabbed multiple times and his clothes were torn, he acted like nothing had happened. Raizo was stunned by the thug's punches, his body covered in blood. He could only clench the small weapon in his hand and frantically stab at the opponent. Though the dagger was small, each stab was fatal. Finally, the thug, due to severe exhaustion, completely lost his ability to resist. Raizo seized this golden opportunity and successfully executed a counterattack. But at this moment, what he felt in his heart wasn't the glory of victory that the master spoke of, but rather being overwhelmed by fear and intense guilt. Recalling how he had just immersed himself in violence, lost his reason, his eyes filled with murderous intent. It was as if that had no longer Raizo with his own thoughts and emotions, but had turned into someone else. A killing machine dominated by rage and survival instinct. Even he felt his face was terrifying and was filled with horror. Raizo couldn't help but have the idea of deserting, but with his current strength, he was completely unable to confront the entire Ozunu organization. Therefore, he had to continue to endure. To test Raizo's loyalty, the master escorted a runaway female ninja before him with a solemn and righteous expression. He declared that he would grant him the honor of carrying out the punishment. This scene immediately reminded Raizo of the senior brother's brutal act toward the youngest senior sister many years ago. The scene at that time was as clear as day, and now the female ninja was kneeling before him, looking at him with the same hopeless and pleading eyes. Raizo knew in his heart that the master was forcing him to suppress his emotions once again. He gripped his weapon but couldn't bring himself to strike, because he knew deeply that killing her would mean personally killing the last shadow of the youngest senior sister. It would be the complete destruction of the last bit of emotion deep inside him. Therefore, he chose to resist. And at this moment, he also transitioned from a controlled tool to a human being with flesh and blood, with emotions and conscience. On the master's order, the surrounding ninjas immediately drew their swords and rushed to attack Raizo. Although Raizo tried his best to wield the weapon he was most proficient with, trying to open a path to survival, after all, 2 hands were hard to match many hands. Raizo quickly appeared with many sword wounds, blood flowing freely. His body couldn't hold on anymore and collapsed. In that moment, he seemed to see death calling to him. However, thinking that the youngest senior sister's injustice had not yet been resolved, he was unwilling. He struggled to get up, wanting to fight to the death. But in the next second, countless shurikens rained down, immediately piercing his body. After a stabbing pain, Raizo lost his balance and uncontrollably fell from the top of the hundreds-of-meter-high building. Perhaps his fate wasn't over yet. Below happened to be a pool of water. After escaping death, Raizo began a life of long exile. He fled to Berlin and hid in the shadows of this city. During that time, he never stopped training himself. Every day, he regularly pressed his palms on a steel plate with spikes and performed handstand push-ups 0 times just to train his core strength. After finishing, he quickly ate a bowl of rice noodles mixed with plain water to restore some physical strength. Then he immediately devoted himself to practicing ninja swordsmanship and chain at least thousands of times each swing. Finally, the shuriken, an indispensable skill of a ninja. 20 years. More than 0 days and nights. With the same throwing motion, he has repeated it countless times. Now, his muscle memory is deeply ingrained. Even blindfolded, he can make the shuriken hit the target with absolute precision, showing the style of a top ninja. But walk the night too much, and one day you will encounter a ghost. Although Raizo was careful enough, he still couldn't completely hide his tracks. Faced with an offer of help from a stunningly beautiful woman, an ordinary person would definitely be captivated by her charm and find it difficult to escape. However, Raizo didn't waver at all. He immediately saw through the other party's identity. Which clan do you belong to among the 9 clans? The beautiful woman, seeing her plan exposed, didn't hide anymore. She directly drew a dagger and stabbed at Raizo's vital points. However, she clearly underestimated Raizo's strength. At that moment, the store owner heard the sound of the brawl and hurriedly ran out from the back room. There was no one in sight, only a washing machine shaking non-stop. The store owner suspiciously approached to check, only to see the beautiful woman who had been fighting with Raizo just now being stuffed inside the washing machine. Recently, a series of strange assassinations had occurred. The European police organization quickly noticed something unusual. Special Agent Mika, out of curiosity, began to investigate. As a result, she discovered a strange pattern that is, whenever an important figure was assassinated, a transfer of over $1 million would appear. Mika realized that this matter was certainly not simple, so she immediately visited the wife of a National Security Agency employee who had been assassinated. Through a conversation with this woman, she learned that the employee was forced to quit his job only because he was investigating some matters he shouldn't have been involved in. Since then, his mental state deteriorated rapidly and became extremely unstable. All day long, he suspected everything. Even every door and window in the house was locked with 2 layers of security. In addition, he installed a large number of cameras, motion sensors, and bright lights around the house. However, even so, it couldn't prevent the enemy from taking his life in the dark. The incident. 2 years had passed, during which no one dared to ask about it. Everyone kept their distance. Only Mika was brave enough to delve into the matter. The wife, deeply admiring her courage, gave her a top-secret file and a videotape that her late husband had left behind. After obtaining the clues, Mika brought the box home. Inside the box were all documents related to the history and origin of the Ozunu organization. A thick file recorded countless information about this mysterious organization from its founding to the present. The videotape, on the other hand, showed the scene of the ninja attacking the employee's house, recorded by the surveillance cameras. In it, a person dressed in black was blocking these ninjas. Zooming in on the screen and looking closely, the person dressed in black was none other than Raizo. It turned out that he and this employee had once had a cooperation discussion, but unfortunately, Raizo was ultimately unable to protect this employee. As the investigation went deeper and deeper, the authorization for the investigation of Mika also unexpectedly became a target. First, employees of the Ministry of Interior, then agents of the National Security Agency. Then, employees of the CIA were also targeted one after another. Even the military came at this time. None of them was an exception. All thoroughly searched the office of her superiors. Clearly, the power of the Ozunu organization had infiltrated the political level. The sudden actions of these departments were certainly not accidental but must have been supported by the government behind them. Mika had listened to the warning of her superiors and decided to go home to pack her things and flee. However, when she returned home, she found that a large area around the house had lost power. The whole street was plunged into darkness. Although she hesitated a bit in her heart, she still stepped into the house with a lucky mentality. Under the faint light of the flashlight, she began to pack her luggage. Just as she thought everything was going smoothly, in the blink of an eye, she turned around and discovered that a letter had been added to her luggage. No one knew when. She had only revealed a bit of the truth, and had already brought about a deadly disaster. The enemy had even sent 2 waves of top ninjas to assassinate her. At this critical moment, Raizo appeared in time, easily defeating each ninja of the first wave without any effort. When the second wave of ninjas arrived at the scene, there were only scattered limbs and body parts everywhere. However, Raizo understood that the danger had not yet dissipated. The second wave of enemies could come after them at any time. He led the terrified Mika to an unremarkable hotel. As soon as they entered the room, he cautiously checked around. After confirming that it was safe, he signaled the female agent to take a shower. When she came out after showering, Raizo had already lit a cigarette. Then he allowed the smoke to spread over Mika's body to eliminate any remaining body odor on her. It should be known that a ninja's sense of smell is much more sensitive than that of a hunting dog. The reason Raizo saved her was actually in hopes of joining forces with Europe to fight against the powerful Ozunu ninja organization, because fighting alone would be difficult to succeed. Mika also quite agreed with his proposal. So she took Raizo to meet her superiors, but in the next second, the lights suddenly turned on all around. In an instant, countless European police officers holding tasers and other weapons came out from all directions. Before he could react, electricity struck his body. Just like that, Raizo was tasered unconscious and arrested on the spot. It turned out that Mika's superiors had been under pressure from higher-ups, forcing them to arrest Raizo. Not only was the interior of Europe corrupt, but even politicians from many countries had issued a warrant for Raizo. Whoever could capture him first would receive a favor from the Ozunu Grandmaster, and behind this favor were huge benefits and power enough to make anyone crazy and rush to pursue it. To protect Mika, her superiors had no choice but to compromise. The most urgent thing was to find the traitor who had infiltrated the inside. Only in this way could they grasp the initiative and devise the next step. If you get into trouble, open this. As soon as the words were finished, the lights suddenly went out completely. The entire space was immediately plunged into pitch-black darkness, and nothing could be seen. The second wave of ninjas silently appeared in the darkness. In less than a minute, most of the European police had been hacked and killed by the ninjas. Although everyone was wearing advanced night vision equipment, they still couldn't capture the ninjas' figure. They sometimes swooped down from above, sometimes suddenly rushing out from the corners. The sharp blades in their hands flashed coldly, and someone immediately fell. Seeing this, Mika hurriedly took the key from the sacrificed guard and rushed to the prison to unlock Raizo. The two had just escaped from prison not long when Raizo suddenly stopped. He felt dozens of auras appearing around him. These auras were of different strengths, but all carried a cold, murderous intent. After Mika went upstairs, the ninjas hiding in the shadows appeared one after another. These were all his senior brothers and junior brothers who had trained with him since childhood. However, now they had to face each other on the battlefield. Raizo had no way to retreat. He drew out his signature weapon, the chain scythe, and actively charged into the crowd of enemies. The chain scythe is one of the most recognizable exotic weapons in the history of Japanese cold weapons. Its prototype is actually an agricultural sickle. This weapon was developed specifically to deal with samurai swords. The chain is about 2 to 4 meters long, connected to a heavy metal mace at the end. Its advantage lies in the synergy between long and short, combining soft and hard. When attacking, it can be extended long. When defending, it can be shortened. It is both firm and soft, and its transformation is unpredictable. Especially in tight spaces or when dealing with many enemies, the advantages of the chain scythe are even more obvious. When the enemy wielded a samurai sword and approached, the user only needed to swing the chain to wrap the mace at the end around the opponent's sword body, using centrifugal force to disarm them, then seizing the opportunity to close the distance, and use the scythe to slash across the neck. But wanting to control the chain scythe was by no means an easy task. The chain scythe requires a very high level of skill from the user. Newbies can hardly master it. With just a little carelessness, it can harm themselves. But once mastered, it will surely become a deadly force that makes enemies tremble at its name. And Raizo was just such a strong person who could maximize the power of the chain scythe. In addition to mastering the chain scythe, he also used the samurai sword skillfully and expertly. It would not be an exaggeration to say that he was a comprehensive hexagonal warrior. After a fierce battle, Raizo was seriously injured, his whole body covered in blood. The ninjas that the master sent to deal with him all had extraordinary strength. All were top masters, and the number was terrible. They kept rushing up, frantically charging at Reizo. Kill a wave, and another wave would appear continuously without stopping. It was simply impossible to kill them all. The situation was becoming increasingly unfavorable for him. In desperation, Reizo had no choice but to avoid their sharp edges. He tried to endure the pain and desperately ran to the street. The Great Master also led a group of agile ninjas in close pursuit. Reizo ran away desperately while using the passing traffic to turn around and counterattack. It's just that the fierce battle before had greatly depleted his physical strength. Now, he was completely relying on the soaring amount of adrenaline to support him. The openings were also becoming increasingly obvious. For a minute of carelessness, he was struck by another fatal slash. Fresh blood immediately flowed non-stop from the wound that had almost cut him in half. The Great Master saw this and immediately took the opportunity to press forward. Reizo tried to resist with his strong will. Just as the two were facing off with their swords, a car suddenly rushed over and knocked them both away, causing them to fall. Reizo, lying on the ground, was already at the end of his rope, with no strength to resist. Meanwhile, the Great Master was approaching him step by step. In a critical moment, Mika suddenly slammed on the brakes, swinging the tail of the car and directly knocking the Great Master away. Reizo dragged his injured body and climbed into the car with difficulty. After cutting off the ninjas, Reizo's consciousness almost disappeared. Before falling into a coma, he told Mika not to take him to the hospital. So after briefly reporting the current situation to her superiors, Mika drove to a remote hotel according to Reizo's wishes so that he could recover from his injuries here on his own. As soon as the tracking device was activated, the signal was also immediately received by her superiors. He then informed the International Special Police via an encrypted channel. It turned out that Mika had made Reizo swallow a tracking device. She deliberately left a scent to lure the ninjas. As long as the ninjas took Reizo back to the organization's base, the tracking device hidden in his body would play a crucial role, and the International Special Police were ready to wait. Once the tracking signal stabilized at the organization's base, they would quickly take action to capture the enemy. At this moment, in the rear compartment of a bouncing car, Reizo gradually regained consciousness. He saw a black color all around, only the sound of the car engine running, and the sound of the tires rubbing against the ground. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Reizo began to operate the Ozunu ninjutsu that the master had once taught him. He closed his eyes, trying to eliminate all distractions around him so that he could immerse himself in inner peace. His breathing gradually became steady and deep, his spirit highly concentrated, murmuring incantations, and his hands also forming the 9-syllable hand seals. Following the chanting of the mantra, a mysterious force surged in his body. Immediately afterward, his wounds began to heal at a speed that could be seen with the naked eye, and the blood gradually stopped flowing. Time passed minute by minute. The Great Master seemed not to have noticed Reizo's changes. After arriving at the headquarters, Reizo was tightly tied up and brought before the master. Following a basin of icy cold water poured over his head, Reizo immediately became conscious. At this moment, he was tightly tied to a cross. Tonight, we will avenge our brothers and sisters. With that, the master slowly approached and unleashed a move that pierced the stomach. This was the ninja technique that had been used many years ago to punish Reizo. Although this move wasn't fatal, it could make people feel extreme pain without leaving obvious external wounds. By closing the 5 fingers into a cone shape, and then using the fingertips to pierce straight into the solar plexus, where the lower end of the sternum intersects with the abdomen. This is an extremely sensitive area of the body, densely packed with nerves. Once attacked hard, they would immediately feel unbearable pain. Following a mouthful of fresh blood spurting from his mouth, a small tracking device was also ejected along with it. Only at this moment did they realize that they had been outmaneuvered. Next, the door was forcibly broken through by special forces. A few armored vehicles followed each other and rushed in. The top shooters in front fired their guns frantically, countless bullets raining down. At the same time, the special forces behind threw highly potent stun grenades. The dazzling light immediately enveloped the entire scene. The unprepared ninjas were caught off guard by this sudden and violent attack, and their formation was disrupted. In the past, they could hide in the darkness, but at this time, under the bright light and dense firepower, they were all exposed and could not hide. The close-range combat advantage that they were proud of also completely disappeared under the Special Forces' strong firepower and strict containment. At this time, the ninjas were completely panicked, wanting to escape but could not find a place to hide. The situation was clear, and it was only a matter of time before the enemies were wiped out. Mika quickly untied Reizo. After regaining his freedom, he ignored his injuries and immediately sought out the Great Master, the one who had killed the youngest senior sister. Around him were 4 fellow disciples, each of whom was a master among masters. After dealing with the 4 guardians, Reizo finally welcomed the moment to avenge the youngest senior sister. Reizo was no less agitated than an emperor holding the truth at this time. Even God has to follow what Reizo is doing. Not more than a few moves, the Great Master had both arms chopped off, his throat was cut, and he died. After releasing the deep hatred in his heart, Reizo didn't stop. He turned and faced the real demon in the darkness. The ninja grandmaster who had forged him into a weapon. 20 years ago, Raizo was brought into this dark world as a child. The grandmaster used brutal methods to teach him to control pain, causing him to endure inhuman torment through countless days and nights. Now, Raizo stood here. He was no longer the puppet being controlled as before. He wanted to let this respected master personally experience what true pain is. In just a moment of fighting, Raizo's weapon was destroyed by the Ozunu grandmaster. He couldn't help but be shocked and, looking at the crippled weapon in his hand, realized that the opponent before him was much stronger than he had imagined. At this time, the grandmaster stood up, suddenly disappearing like a demon into the darkness. In the next second, he appeared behind Raizo and slashed hard at his back. The gap between the two was clearly not at the same level at all. The grandmaster took advantage of the situation and unleashed a powerful punch, directly sending Raizo flying several meters away. No matter what move Raizo made, the master could always easily resolve it, as if he knew every move of Raizo. Raizo was unwilling. He took a deep breath, then stood firmly with his legs spread wide, his knees slightly bent, his hands tightly gripping the hilt of the sword, focusing his energy on his dantian. After regaining his posture, the two immediately engaged in a fierce sword fight behind the sliding door. In the narrow space, the sword light shimmered, the sword shadows were dense, and at the same time, splashes of bright red blood splattered out. Raizo is winning the fight. Just as Raizo swung his sword and slashed towards the master's figure once again disappeared into thin air like a wisp of smoke. Raizo was shocked, but had been prepared for it. Thanks to his previous experience, he quickly turned around and countered. This time his reaction was fast enough, and he launched a fierce attack on the master. Not even showing weakness, the two of them exchanged swords back and forth, their moves changing so quickly that for a moment, neither side could decide the winner. At this moment, Raizo suddenly had an idea. He wanted the master to taste the feeling of a stomach-piercing move. The master groaned slightly, and a mouthful of old blood spurted out. Raizo pressed forward and unleashed a powerful spinning kick. But who would have thought that the master would recover so quickly? In the blink of an eye, he readjusted his stance and slashed at Raizo. As Raizo was about to continue fighting, the master used the shadow escape technique and disappeared without a trace. This was the highest realm that the current Ozunu Grandmaster had reached, and it was also the true essence of a ninja. Their whereabouts are as unpredictable as shadows, both real and illusory, difficult to distinguish. With the current skills that Raizo possessed and his understanding of the way of the ninja, a chasm that couldn't be crossed still existed between him and the Grandmaster. It was a level he couldn't reach at the moment. Just as the master was about to kill him, Mika fired 2 shots in time, saving Raizo and interrupting the unexpected turn of events. The Ozunu Grandmaster flew into a rage. His figure suddenly flashed, turning into an afterimage circling behind Mika. Before she could react, the blade pierced her heart. Whether it was the gentle junior sister of yesteryear or Mika lying in a pool of blood at this moment, they were all the warm lights and the only remaining affection for Raizo in this world. Now both had died under the master's blade. However, Raizo didn't fall into a frenzy of rage because of it. On the contrary, this heart-wrenching pain stimulated the hidden power deep within him bit by bit. The master was shocked. He couldn't feel Raizo anywhere at all. From the beginning, the ninjutsu that he cultivated always emphasized the inner self, reaching a state of emptiness of no thought, believing that only by discarding all distracting thoughts could he achieve the ultimate state of hiding an explosion in battle. However, Raizo at this time broke the rules and followed his own path, comprehending the truth of controlling techniques with memory. These were the unique moves that were driven by the memory of the junior sister and Mika. These emotional connections, which in the master's eyes were weaknesses, became the key elements for Raizo's awakening. It also proved that the essence of human nature cannot be completely erased. When the revenge battle ended, Raizo, full of pain, thought that Mika had died under the master's fatal stab. He carried her body out of the training hall. However, upon closer inspection, he discovered that Mika still had faint signs of life. It turned out that she was also one of the very rare people with a heart on the right side. The master's stab had not actually hit a vital spot. Seeing that Mika was fine, Raizo quietly turned and left. The operational nature of the Ozunu organization in the Ninja Assassin film is like a dark metaphor for the authoritarian system. This violent organization, disguised as ninja culture, relies on psychological manipulation and physical training as an industrial chain to turn people into killing tools. The daily high-intensity training that members must undergo and the work system in modern society are exactly the same. Both are using systematic violence to crush emotions and personal dignity. However, the film doesn't just stop at the storytelling level of simple revenge using violence to control violence. But through Raizo's journey of rebirth in the midst of blood and fire, it touches on a philosophical proposition with deeper weight. When violence becomes a person's most familiar way of communicating and fighting, how do you break this inertia and use non-violent methods to interpret the truth of freedom? When the system you are living in turns you into a dehumanized monster, Can you still steadfastly maintain the final limit in your heart and walk to the end of your life with dignity as a human being? The director gave an answer full of Eastern Zen in the ending. Reizo discarded the gold watch, symbolizing the glory and constraint of the past, completely severed from the violent past. But he didn't choose to hide and escape from reality. He severed the iron wire binding the creeper, witnessing firsthand the moment life regained its freedom. But he didn't try to intervene and assign it a new trajectory in life. Finally, he stood on the crumbling wall, looking far into the distant, undefined horizon. The entire shot refused to offer a clear destination of salvation. This incomplete story design deconstructed the closed logic of retribution in traditional action films, shattering the audience's expectations of a typical ending. In fact, freedom has never been a destination that can be achieved once and for all, but a difficult process of constantly freeing oneself from shackles. Each attempt to escape leaves new scars on the body, but each scar proves that even under the heavy pressure of the violent system, humanity can still grow tenaciously and wildly in the tiny cracks. Thank you for watching.